Amsterdam A. Including government IIUM E. And in closing opposition, Tilbury A. Small announcement, apparently the mics are not working, so voice projection only. To the debaters, and to the members of the audience, feel free to support team, but keep the support stuff down so it doesn't interfere with how the adjudicators hear the speakers. Right? And turn off mobile devices, pacemakers, stuff like that. Right, that said, we call the House to order and invite the Prime Minister to open the debate.
Ladies and gentlemen, what is the problem with domestic abuse that we see happening in today's world? We see that a lot of victims who have been abused, they may be women, wives, or they may be children who get abused, and sometimes when they go to the hospitals and clinics, doctors suspect that there has been abuse, which has occurred. And we come to a junction where doctors are faced with a conflict, whether to respect confidentiality, whether to respect the non-consented the inexistence of consent from the victim, or to go and uphold their moral responsibility of protecting their patients. And the government in today's House proudly says that doctors' first duty is to protect and to ensure that there is a possibility of saving lives of their patients who they suspect are being abused. Because currently what is happening now is whenever people are abused, women or children are abused, what doctors need to do is they need to ask for consent before they could actually report the abuse. And we say in our proposal today, we want to do away with that. What we want to do is this. We say that whenever a doctor through its medical report shows that there is some suspicion or they suspect an abuse, that these doctors are obliged to discreetly report without consent of their patients. And this report will assist investigations. This report will start an investigation by the police into the matter. We feel that if doctors who do not fulfill this obligation, and if they are caught not fulfilling this obligation, then they may face disciplinary action amounting to suspension. But what's important in today's debate is the principle of whether or not doctors should remain to respect that confidentiality between the doctor and patient relationship, or doctors should put aside that and further protect their patients, and we believe in the latter. Ladies and gentlemen, what I'm going to talk to you as a Prime Minister is I'm going to talk to you about the duty of doctors in the medical field, and I'm also going to talk to you about why there is a need for doctors to intervene even when there is no consent. Catherine is going to come up here and talk to you about how this proposal would necessarily assist investigation and complement laws of domestic abuse, and she will further talk to you about the message it sends to society. But before I go on, let me take the opening.
Don't you think that without consent, probably there's not going to be any prosecution, and you're actually endangering the person being protected?
No, ladies and gentlemen, we say if there is enough medical evidence, what we are actually doing is we are instigating an investigation that could possibly save that person's life. Because if you don't do that, what you're necessarily doing is sending that victims back to their abusive home, and worst case scenarios, these victims end up dead because they're abused by their husbands or their boyfriends or by their moms and dads. Ladies and gentlemen, it is the duty of the medical practitioners and doctors in this situation to help the patient and save lives, because doctors have a moral responsibility. And they do this rightfully because it is based on a medical report and a medical evidence. We say doctors have documented evidence of injury. What these documented evidences of injury, although it may be just a suspicion, we say what it necessarily does is it legitimizes the report and it helps the investigation, because doctors use medical investigation to show that there are some peculiar situation with that patient, a bone that is broken under some accident that the victim would like to hide. You know, just a stumble on the staircase and the bone is probably fractured. These are medical evidences that has weightage, and we say it is good because this medical weightage gives the report legitimizes the report. We see, ladies and gentlemen, this is especially important, especially in situations where patients or victims are denying abuse. especially because they're afraid of the perpetrator. And we say it is important because the narration of this patient may be inconsistent, maybe because out of fear, maybe because they don't want to get beaten up again. But what's important is this medical report creates that consistency. This medical report creates a legitimate document for investigators to come in and intervene. Because we say, if you expect a fearful patient to come up and tell you what actually happened, we say at the end of the day, that victim is going to face death. I'll take closing now.
Thank you. What happens is, if somebody beats you up and you remain in that person's family, then you won't go to the doctor anymore if he says something to the police, because that person who has beaten you up has such a high influence on you that he will force you not to go to the doctor, which occurs damage to them.
No, ladies and gentlemen, we say that there are cases where the perpetrators think that these things cannot be detected by doctors. But more importantly, we say under that circumstance where they don't have an avenue and they are fearful, whenever there is an instance that doctors suspect of this situation, do you still send them back home? And that is where the proposal gives greater weightage to the rights and the protection of these people. Ladies and gentlemen, on the second level of argumentation, what we are going to argue is also the need to protect, especially when they're weak and vulnerable. Because we argue that mostly women and children who are being abused by the men, the wives or the fathers, are very, very vulnerable. But you have to understand, sometimes it may not also be that they're just denying it, because there are situations where these people think that nothing wrong is being done upon them. We have listened to cases where women think it's all right for husbands to hit them because they think that it's something wrong. We also have situations where children feel that it's just normal spanking, that their parents are just disciplining them. And we see, ladies and gentlemen, these are situations where victims do not even know that they are being abused. And we say, when doctors come into the picture, they need to help. They need to be the voice of these victims who are vulnerable and cannot voice out their needs in the first place. Ladies and gentlemen, what we argue on this side of the house, that the doctors have to have a moral responsibility greater to that. We agree that there may be situations where there may be false suspicion. There may be situations where that person has not been abused anyway. But nevertheless, we say, if there is one chance to save a person and instigate an investigation, we say the doctors should hold this responsibility. Because more often than not, what problem domestic abuse is, when they're investigated too late. Simply because of the problem where people are vulnerable and people cannot speak, and when there are people who suspect all these neighbors and so on and so forth, it creates a problem because there's no documented evidence. But if you allow doctors to do that, we say it strengthens the case, it facilitates the investigation, and it legitimizes the report. But more important than that, we say, when a doctor thinks that by sending this patient home and keeping quiet, it could possibly make him die at the end of the day, the doctors must act on a greater moral responsibility. With all these reasons, I'm very proud to propose.
Right, the House thanks the Prime Minister for her speech and now invites the first speaker from the opening opposition team, the Leader of Opposition.
Thank you, dear Chair, dear everyone. Yes, I like the speech of the Prime Minister. I especially liked her first minute, where she said doctors have two duties. One, to remain confident, and second, to go and do their moral responsibility. The problem with her speech, however, is that she believes there's a conflict in those two, and we as Team Opposition believe there's none. We as Team Opposition say doctors should help their clients, and they can do so best having the confidentiality. Okay, in my speech as an opposition leader, I'll be talking about the model, of course, and why she's at some point plainly wrong. I'll be talking about reasons for a doctor and the client not to like to inform others. Of course, in most cases, we say, yes, it's very obvious, yes, we're going to do something. But the debate is not about that case. I'll look at a case where this debate should be about. And I'll be looking about the client-doctor relation. I'll briefly be telling you about why we believe that the situation at home might get worse, and we'll be talking about avoiding doctor. But let's start with the model. And the point that is crucial here is that the opposition believes that, of course, there should be done everything to stop domestic violence. But we believe this cannot be done when we report a domestic violence act or a suspected domestic violence act against the will of the patient. But Anne has asked in the post-for information, how are we going to do this investigation? What are we going to do if the woman denies? How are we helping her against the violence of her husband if we can't prove anything? If she has just a broken bone and she says, well, I fell off a staircase. We say we should help her by giving her information, by giving her the possibilities for juridical advice. But what we not should do is go against her will, go and say, we know what is best for you, although you do not know yourself. Then her second point, the duty of doctors is to save lives. Dear Chair, we agree. Then the third point, the doctor should protect the vulnerable. Dear Judge, we agree. We believe that the doctor should do everything they do. And I've shown you a few things a doctor can do. Give information, give legal advice, but not, and if it's a child being beaten up, go seek the parents, give the parents advice. Most parents that maltreat their child don't want to. They're not evil men and women that just like spanking. No, they're doing something wrong. And we believe the doctor might help them a lot more than the police may do. Okay, so far about the model. Let's move on to my second point. What might be the reasons for a doctor and a client not to want to inform others? Let me be very clear. In most cases, a doctor observes a broken bone. He asks the woman, what happened to you? And the woman says, well, I was beaten by my husband. The doctor says, did you like being beaten by my husband? The wife says, no. And then they can agree together, let's go to the police. This debate is not about this case. This case is about where the woman says, no, I was beaten. Or either says, no, I was not beaten, I just fell off the staircase. Or the woman says, yes, I was beaten. May I please trust you, dear doctor? I'm going to give you very crucial information, and I don't want it to be used against me. We believe this is very important. Because in the first case, it still might be wrong. And we believe we're doing great harm to these people when she indeed fell off this staircase, and she indeed had some broken bones, but she comes home, her husband being angry. What? Did you tell the doctor and the police that you were being hit by me? I didn't do that, I don't like you. We believe this is a great harm. And also, but most important of all, we believe there's a large taboo on something, and this brings me to my second point. The point on client-doctor relations. As I told you, one word is crucial in this case, confidentiality. We see that being beat up by your husband or by your father is a very harsh thing. Just 1 second. And most people are not really willing to talk to them, especially if they know that all stuff might happen that they didn't want in the first place. Lady.
So you choose to respect consent over the respect of the possibility of these people getting saved?
No, we choose to respect consent, so we give these people advice what they might do in order to save their lives. What we do not choose is just go to the police without these people knowing, wanting that we go to the police, with these husbands called up while these women did not ask for them. What we want indeed to save their lives, and we want them to have every legal possibility. But we believe that if a woman says no, we should look for other solutions instead of blindly invoking the police. And that is the main problem of team government. They didn't give us a specific example in which case going to the police without the consent would be better than just having a little nice chit-chat with the woman and solving the problem together. Please, second government speaker, give us a clear example why your model works well. What exactly is the case where neither of them likes to be the police involved, but the police should be involved? Please give that example. Then I'll continue on my client-doctor relation. The point I made before was that it's so confidentiality, that so embarrassing, so taboo-like, that most people are thinking twice about talking to someone for that. And we believe it's very important that they have someone that they can talk to, and this person, dear chair, is a doctor. We believe that the doctor has this formal duty to be this person of trust. And we believe that the woman is willing to say something to this doctor only because she knows there will be no repercussions, only because she knows, yes, this is a safe haven. 1 second. This is a safe haven. This is a place where I can really talk to someone. And if he advises me to the police, I might consider doing that. But just giving my story doesn't make me automatically set the next step, which might not be wise. Lady.
You consider the fact that the issue of abuse is sensitive for these women to disclose. Yet you say help is only comes in reporting, telling them where to go. How does that work?
Well, I believe it's indeed very sensitive to disclose. So she goes to the doctor with a certain feeling of shame, and she discloses to the doctor. Her next step might be, and I would personally advise that, to go to the police. But it's not the automatical and only first step. And as I told you, Anne will be talking about avoidance of the doctor, and this is particularly a good example of that I have already given to you. But let's move on to the last point. The situation at home might get worse. And again, look at two situations. First of all, the actual maltreatment did happen. Second of all, it did not happen. Let's say it happened. What then? There comes an investigation. Dear judges, do you know how hard the investigation is if there is no person telling what happened, if there is no person willing to testify, what do you think this investigation will lead to? It will probably lead to the man set free. The man set free. The man being extremely angry because he was incarcerated for some time, got some, in his eyes, cruel and incorrect acquisitions, and it wasn't proven, of course, because the woman did not testify. Your model did not include the obligation for a woman to testify against her ombudsman. For good reason it does not. What we also see is the neighbors may know, and we see the abuse may get worse because the police was involved at a way too early stage, and without the full help of all the parties, the police couldn't do anything. And if, okay, so that's the case that this all stuff was true. And the other case is even worse. It was not true, but still, we get the police by it. The woman said, no, nothing happened. The man said, no, nothing happened. Indeed, nothing happened. But the police came over, the neighbors seen it. There's a large stigma for no single reason. So what team opposition has shown you is very clear. Doctors have large duties. One of them is to inform patients, but none of them is to go to police against the will of the patient and do something that harms the interest of the patient. That, ladies and gentlemen, is not a good idea. Thank you.
Right, the House thanks the Leader of Opposition for his speech and now invites the second Speaker of Opening Government, the Deputy Prime Minister.
Speaker, members of the House. First, I have three rebuttals for the side of the opening opposition, where we want to talk about how women wouldn't want to go to the doctors anymore. Secondly, the client and doctor relationship. And thirdly, the situation at home may get worse. And after that, I'm going to move on to my 3 points for today, which is first of all, how this proposal will be assisting in investigation of domestic violence. Secondly, how this will complement domestic violence laws. And thirdly, the message to society that we will send. The first rebuttal, ladies and gentlemen, on how they claim that the women wouldn't want to go to the doctors anymore. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we say in cases of domestic violence, even right now, women go to the doctors discreetly to treat injuries that needs to be treated. It's not as though, ladies and gentlemen, that they go there knowing and hoping that the doctors would report the injuries. Well, actually, some of them might do that. We say all the better. But of course, we agree that the perpetrators wouldn't like it, ladies and gentlemen. But the fact that the perpetrator doesn't like it doesn't negate the fact that action still needs to be taken, that protection of the women or the children still needs to be addressed. Furthermore, ladies and gentlemen, the opposition agrees with us that these are women who do not even dare to get out of their home for fear of what the perpetrator may do to them should they return. Ladies and gentlemen, the only conclusion that we can conclude from this is that these are scared women, scared victims who we cannot possibly expect to come out right and openly report such cases on their own. And this is where our proposal comes in, where you have a third neutral party, wherein the doctors do the reporting, ladies and gentlemen. On the second issue, ladies and gentlemen, the client-doctor relationship. We say the client-doctor relationship is not a relationship that is absolute, because in cases where harms caused tantamount to crime, doctors has an obligation to report. In the cases of rape, in the cases of incest, ladies and gentlemen, where the consent of a victim is not an absolute yardstick for us to rest on. Because if we agree that battered women and children are too scared to report anything, ladies and gentlemen, then we have to agree that that balance has to be struck between the respect for confidentiality and the protection of the vulnerable. And we see that the state always intervenes where children are involved, because they recognize that children are a vulnerable group of society and they cannot protect themselves. And we say it's high time that we extend this definition to also battered women who do not dare to speak out against their perpetrators. Furthermore, ladies and gentlemen, we say anyone who is not genuinely abusing their spouse or their children, ladies and gentlemen, we say simple enough, investigation would show. But we need to allow for investigation to go on to see if there is actually any rightful claim to what the perpetrator has to say. The third issue where we say the situation, where they claim the situation at home may get worse. Ladies and gentlemen, Zuliana has clearly outlined that an investigation would be discreet. And the definition of investigation being discreet is that a perpetrator would not know that investigation is ongoing until they are charged. But ladies and gentlemen, furthermore, ladies and gentlemen, we say that if the investigation, ongoing investigation, realizes that the level of abuse is too bad an extent, ladies and gentlemen, we say they will remove the women, remove the children away from home, much like how they do in the welfare system currently. And ladies and gentlemen, we say, usually the women right now do not report because they realize and they think that investigation may not go anywhere due to the credibility of their report, where they will be seen as to be emotional and subjected to whatever the perpetrator has to say against them. And we say the doctors provided good balance to this as they are third party in this conflict. Now, before I move on to my arguments, yes.
Could you please describe me a discreet investigation without the woman testifying and without the man needing not be known before she is being charged?
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, for the women to testify, that doesn't take part in the investigation, that takes part during the trial where the man is actually charged. And we say by then he will know what's going on already. And furthermore, investigation, ladies and gentlemen, can come in the form, discreetly in the form of simply medical examination of the women, ladies and gentlemen. Zulena has already outlined clearly how there are different forms of abuse that would separate a genuine accident from injury caused by a blunt object or by another person, ladies and gentlemen. On to my first argument in today's house, where we see how the proposal will assist in investigation of domestic violence laws. We say currently, domestic violence laws being already in place are not optimized because many times, as we have agreed on both sides of the house, victims don't come out right to report their injury. And we say, ladies and gentlemen, when victims do not report, first of all, we have already handled this in our proposal, where right now the doctors do the reporting for them to instigate the investigation. And second problem we have with current domestic violence laws is that the report of victims are more often than not questionable because they may be emotional state are taken into consideration, their relationship with the perpetrator taken into consideration. What our proposal does is to lend credibility to the report because now the report comes from an authorized medical personnel, ladies and gentlemen, a third party who is not privy to the conflict, who will be able to give a fair judgment and give a fair evaluation of the medical condition of the women involved. Which leads me to my second argument here, where we see how our proposal complements the domestic violence laws. Because we see, ladies and gentlemen, that legislation alone is not enough. A legislation on paper alone telling people that you shouldn't beat your wife, you shouldn't beat your children, is not sending a loud enough message, ladies and gentlemen. What we need is to empower doctors, the first person to come in contact with these battered victims, to report where we need speedy intervention, ladies and gentlemen. And in domestic abuse cases, Zulena has already outlined how speedy intervention is crucial because anything lesser than that may lead to more harm, may lead to eventually to death. Closing.
If you have one investigation which is discreet, you have to take all the medical reports, which takes a lot of time. There is no speediness in this policy and it will not protect those innocent victims.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we see when we want to look at the form of intervention here, it is relative. Because in our form of intervention, ladies and gentlemen, then when you instigate a report, at least you are taking out all these other medical reports and at least you are doing something about it. If we are to stick to status quo, which is what they are proposing, that it's too troublesome, that you need too many paperwork, what are you saying essentially? We just ignore these battered women? We just let them go on beating? We say, ladies and gentlemen, when it comes to the safety, when it comes to the life of people, we err on the side of the government. Secondly, ladies and gentlemen, prosecution of any criminal doesn't require consent, ladies and gentlemen. More importantly, what is needed is to start off the investigation, ladies and gentlemen, which will ultimately lead or not lead to prosecution. Which leads me to the third issue in today's house, where we look at a message to society, where we agree that the government's duty is to take care of the welfare of the people. And when we see domestic violence as a form of abuse of the vulnerable group of society, ladies and gentlemen, we say the government has to be seen to be playing its part in protecting the society. With our proposal, we're sending a message that the welfare of all citizens are taken care of, especially those who are weaker and cannot stand up for themselves, ladies and gentlemen. At status quo, we say the welfare department cannot do much because they ultimately depend on victims willingly coming forward. But we have already established to this part, ladies and gentlemen, that these are victims who do not dare to do so. Therefore, we say the government has a responsibility to place this responsibility on the person who has the capacity to report and has the medical knowledge of the injury, the doctors, ladies and gentlemen. For all these reasons, what we on the side of the governing government has shown you is how we need this speedy intervention in order to curb this domestic violence and how this proposal will assist in investigation and also complement current domestic laws. And we have also shown you how the message of society that this proposal would send is to the sure way of protecting the vulnerable and the weak in society. For all these reasons, very proud to propose. Thank you.
Right, the House thanks
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And we from Amsterdam B for Bonaparte, if that is, would like to stress that we're actually pretty certain that we are creating a worse situation for the people that you are trying to protect, and that discreet investigations are not the same as medical reports and probably would require talking to the neighbors, who might then tell the husband, and that discreet investigations also would include talking to the husband, because it is actually, well, that's demanded of any prosecution, that at some point the suspect actually knows that they're investigated upon. That would be very nice and very friendly to these people. I want to do one point of rebuttal before I start my speech. That I did not know that it was true that in cases of crimes like rape, a doctor actually has to report these things to the police. And since there's no country that we're actually debating this in, and I think this differs per country, I can just say, I don't believe this. And, well, pick a country and say it is true. But I just don't believe it, I'm sorry. But I'm going to talk about why these people are going to avoid doctors and why that's bad. I'm going to talk about abusive relationships. Why do people stay in there, and why having the trust of the doctor and not the doctor going to the police is better. I'm going to talk a little bit about the rationality of the people staying in there, why they're doing something weird there, and I'm going to talk about prosecution and evidence. Now, first, avoiding doctors. Well, there's actually 2 cases or 3 cases where there's avoidance of doctors. These people know I might be reported upon. I have bruises. I should probably not go to the doctor while I'm just having a fever or something serious like appendix infection, for example, but I also have bruises and they might actually see that. I shouldn't go to the doctor. This could be very serious and cause actual death of this person. The other cases, the husband or partner in general might just not allow you to go to the doctor, which is a very credible threat, considering that these people are being beaten and that they probably listen to that person while they're being beaten, so they're not going to the doctor in that particular case. And then lastly, there's also the case when you have a broken bone, you might be afraid that it looks exactly like a broken bone that was broken by someone else for some reason, and then you don't go to the doctor, and it might actually heal in a very weird fashion. No, thank you, madam. And all these cases are bad, simply because people don't get the care that they need, but it also means that a doctor does not have the possibility to inquire with that patient, are you being maltreated by your husband? Are you being, is there a problem in your house? So that that person doesn't have the possibility to speak to that one person that she can trust, because that person is never going to tell anyone else, and therefore is a person of trust that she can tell without having a situation where she might be threatened. And then the second point I'm going to deal with when you have spoken.
Look, I want a yes or no answer. Is a choice of a woman under duress a legitimate choice or legitimate consent?
Yeah, and I'll tell you why. Right, but that's actually my second point. The other reason why it's bad is just because they're not getting medical care, which we think is bad in general. The other reason why it's bad is that the doctor is actually the right person to inform the person being abused about the options that are there, because it is a trusted person, because the doctor also has more information than the neighbor or a friend who might have to look into it, while they have all the information ready. Now, second point then, abusive relationships. Why do people stay in an abusive relationship? Now, first prop stood up and said, well, they might not know that they're being abused, or that being abused is very bad. If you're in that situation, you're probably in a cultural group where a woman has a low social status, where it's perfectly fine for a husband to beat his wife. Now, if on that instance you're probably, for example, going to be divorcing because you're being abused, or your husband is going to be taken into custody because of the abuse, you are going to carry an extreme social stigma of being the bad wife because you didn't listen to your husband, and your husband has all the right to beat you. Now, in that case, it's probably better for that woman to stay in that relationship, or at least she's the one to decide whether it's better for her to stay in that relationship, and not the police and not the doctor, because she is the only one who knows the consequences of being in that relationship and then being taken out of it. Now, on the other hand, if that woman is afraid of her husband, for example, then still we think the doctor should be talking to her, making her confident that she's going, that she actually has to go to the police herself. But I'll deal with that in prosecution a little bit more. And then lastly, we also think that women don't go to the police when they do, or anything else, because they don't have a knowledge of all the alternatives that they have. For example, that there are safe houses in certain countries, and that they don't know that they actually exist. And since their policy doesn't include taking that woman to a safe house, you're not actually creating a better situation when the investigation starts, that is. Actually having the doctor tell them that there's a safe house, that they can go to the police, is a much better situation and will create a safer situation for that woman. Now, then I'll go to the rationality, because here I already mentioned it. We actually think that that woman is probably better placed to look at whether she has a good chance of getting the husband away, whether she has a good chance to survive after they separated and will be able to provide for herself economically, for example, and whether she will still have contact with her family, whether her kids will still be willing to look at her, all these things. And she's the one to decide, not the doctor, not the police. We think, we think, actually. Now, then lastly, prosecution and evidence. I already did part of it. We don't think there's such a thing as a discrete investigation. The suspect is always going to know, and that's going to be difficult, especially if you don't take the woman out of the house. Then secondly, we also think that medical evidence is rather shallow. A broken bone is just a broken bone. You don't regularly see whether that bone was broken by someone or by the staircase. Now then, if you then look at it, you need actual witness statement. You need the actual victim, or you need other witnesses like neighbors. We don't think neighbors are generally going to be reporting on them, even if they're questioned by the police. Maybe because they're scared, or else because there's a taboo on reporting that sort of thing, because you're invading someone's privacy and you're actually hurting someone, especially when you don't know whether it's actually true. And then lastly, that just means that this person is going to be let off very easily when there's no testifying, when there's no witness statement. And we don't think these women are going to be witnessing if they're forced to it by the police and by the doctor. That's going to create the unsafe situation we're very afraid of. They're not protecting the patients they want to protect. We do. And therefore, we beg you to keep the trust alive that there is between doctor and patient.
Right, the House thanks the Deputy Leader of Opposition for her speech and now invites the first speaker to closing government, the Member of Government.
Mr. Chair, the extension that will be coming from closing government today's debate will analyze the very idea of why a state needs to take a proactive role when it comes to cases of domestic violence, and especially when it comes to cases of suspected domestic violence, Mr. Chair, why there needs to be a preemptive action by the government within this instance. Before we go on to that very principle, Mr. Chair, that I will establish, I have several rebuttals that I need to handle. First of all, is this idea of women in distress, i.e. not women per se, but as an individual generally, Mr. Chair. Last time I checked, in any legal system, for example, when it comes to choice, when it comes to consent, when it comes to the feelings of a person under distress, for example, because the person is swayed by the circumstances in which he or she is placed, Madam Chair, that's why, for example, the consent, the choice made by the person is not considered a legitimate choice or legitimate consent in any legal system. Even if the person is being brought to court, for example, Mr. Chair, a judge in this instance will not give that much weight upon that person who's been placed in that situation because of the mental attitude, because of the mental influences that she faced when it comes to that situation. Hence, This is where, for example, circumstantial evidence, when it comes to this medical report or CAT scans, for example, this is where, Mr. Chair, the first eyewitness, i.e. the doctors, Mr. Chair, plays such a proactive role in this preemptive attempt by a state to circumvent or to reduce the number of domestic violence cases in countries, especially those, for example, Mr. Chair, that is very patriarchal in nature, or even secular democracies in Europe, for example, that have minority section of society still practicing these harmful practices. Sit down now. The second problem I have, Mr. Chair, is this whole idea of abusive relationship. They say it is okay for an individual to live within this abusive relationship because this is what their culture are, this is what their family are. Hell, we should just stay, be content with our lives and get abused every day. It's okay. We say, Mr. Chair, within this instance, this is where, for example, governments can't condone harmful practices, especially when we talk about minority practices within various states. I even said that the government has a certain moral standard that they have to uphold, that they have to upkeep. For them, let us allow this minority, for example, or let us allow this very particular society to flaunt the norms and continue the harmful practices. For them, it doesn't matter, for example, because then all the process, Mr. Chair, are very practical issues, but do not clash with the principle that was established, or should not a woman within this instance be allowed an avenue, Mr. Chair, i.e. should or should not a doctor, Mr. Chair, take the proactive stance and report these cases to begin with. Yes, ma'am.
Obviously, we're not saying you should hit your wife. We're saying your wife is actually going to be maltreated more if she's forced to report in a way through the doctor.
This is why we say it encourages people to come out of the nutshell and try to empower themselves, and we're providing them with an avenue, Mr. Chair, to do so. For them, let us somehow contend with the fact that status quo may be prolonging the suffering of this individual, because look, the consent of the person that you can give the person as much advice as you want to, but it may take like 5-6 years before the person will actually open up and go to the police, Mr. Chair, or go seek help, for God's sake. We say that if you have the measure now, if you have the suspicion now, let's do it now. This is where we're going to expedite the process, Mr. Chair, of weeding out these problems within the society, and we feel, especially, Mr. Chair, the society within the third world countries need to understand this matter properly. Sit down, sir. Moving on to my extension, Mr. Chair, on why states need to take a proactive stance within this measure. Because the nature of abuse cases, especially within third world countries, Mr. Chair, especially within third world societies, is that the abusers themselves do not know that their actions are wrong, i.e. and as they have considered these individuals who are being abused, they feel contented to be abused, Mr. Chair. This is where, for example, we say that the government must take its stance in changing these norms, in changing the perception of this society, in believing that it's okay to let this practice carry on. That's why, for example, Mr. Chair, a state has a right or has a need to define norms, to define standards within a society. That's why, for example, Mr. Chair, that the government must be consistent in its stance concerning harmful practices being inflicted upon another one of its citizens. We say that's why, for example, the practice of sakti, i.e. the wife burning practice, Mr. Chair, where if a husband dies, the wife gets burned with the husband, for example, or even, Mr. Chair, the practice of honor killing. If you believe that, for example, a female member of your family is having improper relationships with another man, the female member of the family is legitimized to kill the person. We feel, Mr. Chair, the harm inflicted upon a member of society in an offense against the state. That is the nature of domestic violence. Sit down, sir. I.e., as an offense against the state, it is a criminal offense. Why should the government now back down from this form of responsibility? Why should the government now, Mr. Chair, make exceptions to the general rule that, look, we do not need to make a proactive stance, we can prolong the suffering of these individuals, the government can take a stance later on when the person actually wants to report, and the person, for example, Mr. Chair, within this instance, are yet to be enlightened. Sit down, sir. This is then what we talk about extending the factions, extending the moral legitimacy, the moral principles of the medical professions. Because then, Mr. Chair, when doctors are forced to take a much more proactive stance in countering this problem, Mr. Chair, we feel we're extending further duty upon doctors in parallel, for example, preventive treatment. I.e., if doctors, for example, can make preventive treatment to any form of harms that can be inflicted upon a person, Mr. Chair, via sicknesses, for example, we say, why can't you make this form of so-called preventive treatment? Because you're preventing the person from being hurt further in the future. We say that, look, the point of the matter is now, at this very level, Mr. Chair, what's the level of consciousness of these doctors per se? I.e., can a doctor, Mr. Chair, or can an individual itself leave with a moral conscience that, look, you allowing this person to go away without knowing about the fact that she might survive tomorrow or not. We say, Mr. Chair, this is when we are actually the ones who are empowering these doctors to begin with. We are the ones, Mr. Chair, who's allowing the state, for example, to carry out its responsibility properly. Because domestic violence is nothing simple to look at. It is an offense against the state. It is a criminal offense. We are providing the government, we are providing the doctors the opportunity to take a proactive role and not a reactive role as what the status quo demands them to do. We say, Mr. Chair, this debate merits, the proposal, Mr. Chair, merits to be analysed based on principal values, and we say, Mr. Chair, the reactive stance taken by the opposition in today's debate is not good enough to create awareness, to actually instill this form of mentality into the society that these harmful practices are bad, these harmful practices are not accepted, these harmful practices are not condoned. We say, Mr. Chair, the closing government wins the debate.
Right, the House thanks the Member of Government for his speech and now invites the Member of Opposition to take the
Mr. Speaker, members of the House, let me start with some rebuttal. We've heard from my predecessor that they are taking a proactive stance, but somehow failed to show how this proactivity actually is going to work. The real problem with it is that the situation is going to get worse for the woman if we cannot achieve a conviction. And no one on the side of the proposition has shown us how we could possibly achieve a conviction without the will of the victim to go forward and to actually say, yes, it was my husband who caused these injuries, it was not a radical rightist who beat me up in the street, which she could otherwise always claim, ladies and gentlemen. And as soon as she does this, the whole prosecution process will fall apart and the situation for the woman is going to be worse than it was before. If she was ever allowed to go to the doctor before, she will now most definitely no longer be allowed by her husband to go there anymore. And if he survives Peter, he will have any chance to prevent her from going there, even if she has a disease which is unrelated to actually his abuses. Furthermore, ladies and gentlemen, there was this comparison of burning widows. And no one on this side of the House said that violence, domestic violence, should not be punished. But due to various factors, under your model, prosecution is more harmful for women. Forced prosecution is more harmful for women than not having it, and it is hard to see how this could possibly be the case for burning widows. Now, let me come to my own points then, which are going to be the violation of patients' rights. Second of all, I will dwell further on the counseling role of doctors, and finally talk about other avenues in the case of children. Now, first of all, ladies and gentlemen, we strongly believe in patient rights, and we strongly think that they have a right to indicate the problem to police anytime they want to. This is status quo. A woman, if she has been beaten, can go to police if she wants to. But there are reasons for her not to do it. These reasons might appear irrational to you, but ladies and gentlemen, we believe that grown-up people make their decisions themselves. And they do take decisions that you think may be harmful. They smoke, they drink, but they have the right to do so. They even do suicide, ladies and gentlemen, but it is their right as a grown-up person to do these things, and they decide on it themselves. They have, furthermore, often very good reasons in the case of domestic violence not to indicate this, which are even objectively very sensible. And you said they might have fear. Yes, and this fear might very well be justified, ladies and gentlemen. There have been cases where women have come forward, have gone to a women's shelter, and have later on been shot there by their husbands. And you just cannot 100% guarantee to the woman that she is safe. You may offer a POI on that. Yes, please.
Under your rationale, these people are so scared they'll never go out, and you would rather they commit suicide.
What a nonsense, ladies and gentlemen. She has then still the choice to go to the police. She has this choice any time. So it would be pretty stupid to commit suicide in that case. But ladies and gentlemen, if there was this woman, this wasn't a single incident of honor killings where a woman did such a thing and they felt their honor violent, then they have been killed. And it is up to the woman to balance the risks and the options of going there. Furthermore, ladies and gentlemen, they could fear exclusion from families. Yes, they could be afraid because there is a financial dependence. And if it was just a one-time problem, the prosecution might still be worse than not having prosecution. So it is up to the woman, and particularly if we also consider that the conviction is so unlikely. But what then actually happens is that people do no longer have the right to visit the doctor without unwanted consequences. And we strongly believe that there's a fundamental right to medical care for anyone. But for those women who just don't want forced prostitution, you are factually denying them the right to medical care. And we on this side of the house think it is just unbearable. And if you really think women can't take decisions properly, then ladies and gentlemen, we better should educate these women better. Furthermore, ladies and gentlemen, let me come to my second point, and that is the counseling role of the doctor. And there are good reasons for confidentiality for priests, lawyers, and doctors. And that is that people should be able to turn these persons in any case, even if they have committed a crime themselves, such as an injured robber should just not bleed and die in the forest. He should have the possibility to come forward even though there's a state's interest for prosecution. You are saying, in your case, that even those people should not have this right to confidentiality who can take a conscious decision that they do not want prosecution. And the consequence is that doctor and patients can no longer discuss openly. Psychological counseling of this woman might be needed, but it cannot be given to her anymore by the doctor because she won't come in the first place, and if she comes, she won't tell the truth. A trusted doctor can very often convince a woman to come forward to police and in a trial, but it will often be a longer process where this doctor convinces the woman. Or this is no longer going to work under your model. A family doctor always often knows the whole family well and can counsel the husband. For example, he can prescribe therapy for this husband. And if you think confidentiality should be lifted, why not make it an option instead of an application so that the doctor can judge the individual situation? But finally, ladies and gentlemen, what to do with children then? We think we have authorities that check on them and not let the doctor do the work of these youth authorities. Random checks from these authorities from which you cannot escape and from which you do not know when they happen should take this role because they cannot be avoided, unlike doctors' visits, and which has all these disastrous consequences, such as these people dying from their injuries. Let schools and kindergarten indicate these problems because there's an obligation to go to school, and if children don't go there, you can start investigation anyway. Ladies and gentlemen, so with strong reasons, we think that their model is almost as bad as running the draw in the alphabetic order. I beg you to oppose.
House thanks the member for opposition for his speech, the final speech on the government bench today. We now invite
Well, opposition has come up with 3 reasons why we should not have this proposal, and it went on everywhere from cultural norms to how it will deter people to go. But the gist of it is, first, the idea of conviction without consent, second, violation of the patient's right, and third, how they say it violates the right to medical care. But let's just look at the first one, the conviction without consent. He said, in an event of persecution, an event where there's no consent, there would be no persecution being taken place. But we say if you look at parallel to rape cases where medical evidences is being highly valued rather than just the consent. Because in the end of the day, if it's the life of someone you're protecting, medical consent or proof or evidence is always valued higher than just the consent itself. Because we always know there's always a reason why people don't give consent. And just look at the idea of violation of patient's right. We question them. What kind of right are you talking about? Are you talking about the right to abuse or the right to be abused? Because if these 2 rights are the 2 rights you want to upheld, we don't see how it works. Because in essence, government is taking a preventive measure to help their innocent citizens from being victimized. So whatever it is the reason, whatever is the cause, we say as long as the stance is bad, government should take inactive reasons to come in and help these people. Looking at an instance of how they say it will act as a deterrence from people, as denying them for medical right, now that if they have constant threat from husbands not to go and get medical attention, or it's just them themselves not wanting to reveal the information. We say, let's just look at the essence of murder and also drug. We see in an instance where people know that murder is something wrong, they will take an extra preventive measure to hide the evidence. Or people would, for example, drug criminalization, people know that it will have a black market of drugs. But just because of that has a possibility of happening, government doesn't simply say, well, we can't criminalize it because we're afraid that something bad might happen. Because the essence is, if something bad, we have to draw a line, government have to take a stance on what is good and what is bad. Yes, some people might deter from going to the doctor, but for a greater good of society, if you still have people coming in to seek medical help and in this form could help this person, we say we should go saving a majority of numbers. And even if you want to talk about cultural norms, you talk about the idea of how in certain culture it's allowed to abuse a woman. But then we say how this is the idea where the abuse goes undetected, because in the cultural norm it's not known as something wrong. This is where the government steps in and limit on how much can you actually abuse the person. Well, the first thing, you can't even abuse a person, but we just want to send a message to the society that, look, abuse of a wife is not being condoned in the society. Let me just draw a picture of what happened in Pakistan or what happened in Bangladesh, where the Muslim community, for example, think that abusing the wife is something that is justified. And they do it, and they don't know that it's actually being abused, they don't know that it's bad. When the government takes this proactive stance to step in and tell the people, look, your accountability of having this abuse being done is taken into consideration. You're no more freely available to hit your wife at any time. Because now the government takes a proactive role to actually step in and just change this cultural norm. Because the cultural norm, it's not because it's a cultural norm that you have to condone this act. Because in the essence, when it harms a third party, when it harms the citizen themselves, this is an instance the government steps in to help this particular person. And if you talk, yes.
Yeah, we agree that cultures with misuse are bad, and the government should take a chance. But why is this better than just counseling? Why should the police always be involved?
The idea lies within your mechanism itself. Because within the first speech of your speech, what you said was, well, the idea of the abuse is very sensitive of nature. People don't want to talk about it. This woman doesn't want to reveal that they're being abused. It's so sensitive, the fact that nothing can be done to actually help this poor woman. Yet you say the only viable solution that is there is for these people, for the doctor to tell where to go for them to disclose information. When you concede that this information is so vital for them to reveal, how do you expect by telling them where to go, these women will actually want to reveal what's actually happening within their domestic sphere? We don't see this happening. This is the instance where government take a proactive step to help this instance. And how did my extension, how our extension would help is that when we talk about proactive role of the doctor in helping out, we want to have a more to ease the burden of doctors in helping, knowing that now they can reveal the confidentiality of the issues. We want to have the doctor not to have a second thought before revealing this particular information, because then again it moves on nicely on how it would actually create a more avenue where help can be channeled, because now the issues are being highlighted, because now there are more options for the doctors to tell these ladies where to go, because now you know who's being abused, now you know who's being abused and who's not being abused. Now you can, this particular NGOs or whatever women's rights body can actually know who should they go to, not waiting for these people to come and see them. You see how this example of doctor can have a proactive role in helping these women will actually create more avenues for help to be channeled. We see how this works in hand in the idea of not trying to segregate women from the society. This is where we want to empower the women in not letting them be told what is wrong and what is right, but just by the cultural norm of the patriarchal society. Yes.
Why does a woman have the right to cut off her finger herself, but not the right to live with somebody who has beaten her once under your model?
Because this is the idea of legitimizing a third harm by another person. Do you just legitimize the idea of people killing another person just because he thinks that it's my right to kill another person? But I don't see how. I don't believe the idea of the right of a person to do whatever they want as a justified means to actually say what is right and what is wrong. Because here the government dictates what is right and what is wrong. Just because someone wants to take off himself, kill himself, you don't see how suicide would actually be beneficial. Because in this essence, you're victimizing the members of society. You're victimizing the people who are actually practicing the social contract within the system. This is why the government comes in and try to help it. We don't see just because people think that it's right, that's because cultural norm, that we should actually condone these practices. So how does this actually proposal may benefit which other countries it will be practiced in? This side have considered that there are numerous reasons for domestic violence to happen. For instance, it could be because of the cultural norms, it could be because of an informed choice, it could be just because she enjoys being abused. But these all three ideas, but whatever it is, having these people to actually reveal the problem will not necessarily try to solve the problem. Our proposal fits in nicely in given the responsibility and the accountability for doctors to tell these people what to do. Because now what we're encouraging, we have a standard of what government dictates what is bad and what is good. Secondly, the doctors themselves play a proactive role in giving the best medical care. Because the doctors are not only providing medical attention, they also provide justice, they also provide attention, and they also improvise their of the accountability of trying to help people out. And we see that as something good. On a third level, how this proactive role of the doctors would actually open up a channel for more avenues for help to come in. Now that I know who's being abused, who needs the help, and counseling can come in. Now that these three reasons have been done by this proposal, we see all the reasons that this proposal can work anywhere, and we should not take any reason why the opposition thinks it's wrong.
Okay, the House thanks the government speaker for her speech. For the final speech of today's debate, the House now invites the opposition whip.
Of this House, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Speaker, let me first of all tell you what that debate was actually about. This debate was about whether the prop side is right, that a single report of a suspected violence by a doctor will actually protect a possible victim, or whether, as we pointed out in our site, the breakup of the doctor-patient confidentiality will harm the patient and therefore should not be allowed. What our side stands for, therefore, is to protect the confidentiality between the patient, because it remains valuable as a doctor, as a long-term influence on the patient. The argument of both sides, which will prove where the balance actually falls to us, is why the prop's aim of investigation fails, why the confidentiality is important, Mr. Speaker, and the positive influence of the doctors. But at first, just shortly rebut the arguments of my last speaker, because what she claimed was, first of all, the job of the doctors, in the very last sentence, she claimed that the job of the doctors is to provide justice. Now, I don't know about where you come from, but usually this is not the job of the doctors. Usually this is the job of judicial authority. Why is that the case, Mr. Speaker? Well, simply because doctors have not been educated into investigation of police matters and how to judge cases. Second of all, you claim that in certain cultures, it is allowed or nicely seen to abuse women. For example, Pakistan, where the Muslim community is abusing women. Well, we believe this case won't change anything because it is such a cultural influence. You should not go to the doctors and make him a snitch for the police, but you should go to the community, you should go to the religious leaders and tell them explicitly to fight against that discrimination and against the violence against women. But at first, let me come to my points. No, thank you, maybe we can see it.
Sir.
Why this policy of investigation fails? And this is pretty simple. First of all, my partner brilliantly pointed out that this policy already fails because somebody who has been beaten up by a family member, he will simply claim and say and lie that this was a robber who actually robbed me and beat me up, or it was a youth gang, or it was simply radicals who have beat me up. But let us assume, for the sake of the debate, that actually somehow the doctor will find out that this might be actually some family member. Well, we still believe that this investigation is never as discreet as they actually claim, because first of all, it is based on one report. Well, no, it is based on many reports, they claim. Well, this is why we're going to collect them. Well, is that true? Well, let's assume this is true. First of all, your goal, as mentioned by the opening government, is to speed up the process in order to protect individuals. Well, in order to collect many reports, you need time for collecting them, for reading them, for assessing them. This will take a lot of time. So your goal of protecting those individuals fails. If you want to protect them, the report of the doctor should immediately be, as we claimed on our side, to take away these individuals and put them in a female cell, as Kai brilliantly pointed out. But the reality is there are not many reports. Why is this? Because it's the first report on that case. It initiates the investigation. So there's only one report. Madam Speaker, Mr. Speaker, therefore, it is not possible to discriminate an investigation because it would be simply unobjective and therefore based on one assumptions, which would lead to the fact that no attorney will actually prosecute that case. But as we pointed out on our side, the only chance in that situation will be that the police interrogates the perpetrators and victims. But both will have a strong incentive to lie, Mr. Speaker. Why? Because the perpetrators obviously will fear the punishment, but the victim will additionally lie because otherwise he would have already gone to the police and complained. So the consequences are simply that the perpetrator will force the victim in the future to abstain from going to the doctor. And we believe this is bad. Yes, on this one.
Failure of persecution occurs in status quo because there's a lot of problem based on what opening opposition said earlier on. So do you then not want any report at all?
It is not that we don't want any report, but we don't want any report from the doctor because it harms the confidentiality relationship. And this leads me perfectly to my second point, why this is actually so important and why I cannot understand they have neglected it. The doctor's-patient relationships is private. They are obliged to be confidential. There are good reasons to it. Because first of all, doctors, as already mentioned, are not part of the investigation. They have simply no knowledge of the police work. But otherwise, the consequences will be simply that the patient will abstain. And they can either abstain or simply wait till till the suspicious marks have healed. We believe this is bad because, Mr. Speaker, this will hurt the patient in the long term. But why will they simply, not go to the doctor? Why will they remain under the influence of their beloved perpetrator? Well, there is a dependence relationship. First, a lot of people do not go and openly publicize what has happened to them because they will try to protect their family. There is a money incentive that they are dependent on that person, and simply sometimes they are blind due to the fact of law and believe that this person might change. Why is it actually so bad when those people do not go to the doctor? Well, Mr. Speaker, they will, as in future, simply remain in the influence of his perpetrators and simply furthermore obliged to his act and listen to him, not to go to the doctor. This is bad. Because, Mr. Speaker, eternal damage might actually occur. for example in the spine or internal bleeding, the eyesight might be hurt when beating up, when a fist hits your eye. And if they remain away from the doctor, this will have irreparable damage in the long term. Therefore, it is simply better to let those people go to the doctor, even if they might be beaten up in the future, because at least you will avoid irreparable damage. Thank you, Mainzi. But let's assume, Mr. Speaker, that even if actually you go to the doctor because you free yourself from that dependence, then if you have a broken arm, I mean, you simply say, hey, I have a broken arm, I just simply tripped. And this will be believable. And they will hide all the internal damage to them so as to ear the doctors. And Mr. Speaker, this will then lead to a harm for them because they will not achieve the proper treatment. This is why it is a rational decision for many in those situations not to complain and remain hidden. But let me come to the last point. Why actually doctors have a positive influence in this case? They can influence the patients in the long term because the patients trust the doctors, as the doctors help them in those situations, as the doctors heals them. Therefore, it is easier for them to open up, because it's not easy to open up before your friends and your family simply because you're embarrassed. But Mr. Speaker, the doctors can provide, as we've really pointed out on the second part, that psychological counseling. They can therefore help to break up the dependence relationships between the victim and the perpetrator, and therefore give the patients a chance to live in the long term. Or, Mr. Speaker, because they are house doctors and often treat the whole family, they can have an influence on the perpetrator and therefore reduce and diminish the violence in the long term. Therefore, it is better to protect confidentiality. And, Mr. Speaker, if you leave that out, this case, you can simply achieve the same goal by a youth authority or social authorities who can discriminately investigate. And this will achieve the similar goal, but not on the cost of the confidentiality principle, which has so many negative external effects on the patients. For those reasons, brought me back to the post.
Thank you very much. Thank all the team. May cross the floor.